Hello and welcome to another Wearing Hats Saying Things podcast, the podcast where 50% of the hosts aren't bald. And if you're wondering who the bald one is, it is not me. This is another Hats Indoors. I'm Connor Coulthorpe as always. How are you doing? I hope you're really well. Hope you're keeping safe and well in these continuously strange times that we are living in. But, hopefully the more we keep locked indoors and doing our bit, the sooner we can get back to normality. Although it is actually weird because this is sort of becoming normality now. So, I don't know, time will tell. But by the time order is finally restored, whenever that is, there'll be a bigger release of serotonin than ever. Because you'll finally get to see your friends or your extended family. And you give them a hug, or you see your partner again and give them a kiss. Or even get away from your partner who you might be sick to death with by those 3 months or however long it's going to be, because that's all you've seen in the whole time. So whatever the deal is, it will be fantastic. But moving on to today's podcast, and I'm going to be talking about ADHD, which is something that I have suffered with for the majority of my life, which stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Although I used to say it stood for actual dickhead disorder because I always thought it turned me into an actual dickhead. But I'll talk about more like the effects of it later on and how I dealt with the diagnosis in my teenage years and the ups and downs it brought me, as well as just like a few stories and that along the way. But before we get into that, we don't just say things on this podcast. We wear some mighty fine hats and say some things on this podcast. And my hat today is I don't know how you describe it. It's like a Chinese hat. I don't know if that I'm allowed to say that. I think it's made in China or in an Asian country. But that's all I can think to describe it. It's like a pointed at the top, like almost like a lampshade. If that probably is the best way to describe it. It's got like a little black, plasticky thing on the top. Must be to stop like water and stuff getting into it. But it's actually quite comfy. It's got like a little head thing around that fits your head as well. And a little string. I don't know. I would never wear this on a normal occasion. But as this is a podcast where we wear hats, I'm wearing this hat. So I don't know, this one's a weird hat. I don't really know why I've chosen this hat today, but there you are. If you catch that hat, it will be on the title screen probably if you're listening to it now. So yeah, you can probably see what wonderful headpiece I've got on my head. And speaking of pieces of heads, I'm going to be talking about a piece of my head, which is my brain, and how I suffer with ADHD and what ADHD is, like how it works, all that kind of thing. So when I was in year 7 and 8, I was like a pretty well-behaved kid, bang average, I don't know, run-of-the-mill guy. Came to school, did the homework, was probably actually a bit of a nerd. And then sort of got to like the end of year 8, and I started getting in trouble more. I started getting detentions more, answering back at teachers, because I didn't think, I just said. And this carried on into year 9 and was like the year my ADHD was probably like its most aggressive and got me into a lot of bad situations. And I'll explain like why it is so aggressive and kind of the symptoms you get when you have ADHD. So ADHD can be categorized in 3 areas, which is obviously attention, hyperactivity, and the last one, which isn't in the name, which is impulsivity. And that's like a big one because a lot of the time you don't think, you just say, you just do it. And that probably got me in trouble quite a lot, especially when I was in school, but just in everyday kind of stuff, like even at home with my family and things like that. But yeah, some of the things might be, this is from like a mentalhealth.org website, which says lack attention to details and make careless mistakes, have trouble finishing work or school projects, which I did a lot, experience difficulty in paying attention and easily distracted. Like the distraction side, I'll get into that. That's like probably the worst thing about it, or like not the worst thing about it, but the thing that is most strong about it for me anyway. always be on the go. Like, you just can't sit still. You have to be on the go. You have to be doing something. You're a bit impatient, which I can tend to be at times, and be overactive and or exhibit impulsive behaviour. And obviously I was saying about the impulsive behaviour. So that's just a few of the things, just to give you a general gist of how it works. It's basically it's called like a neurobehavioural condition. It's a type of mental disorder, basically. But I think that can be misinterpreted quite a lot, and that is what I'm going to be going over during this podcast, is just trying to explain what it actually is like to have it. So year 9 was when it sort of got bad. That's when it really started for me. Although it did sort of come in at the end of year 8, it was like year 9, that was the time when it really was clear that like something was up. And my mum noticed it. She'd always noticed something wasn't quite the same. They couldn't quite work out what it was, but they just knew there was something not quite, the same. I wasn't like a strange kid, well, maybe I was, but they just knew that there was something odd about my behaviour sometimes. And it got me in a lot of trouble. So one of the things was, like, I remember it got to the point where I wasn't just getting a couple of consequences and things like that. Like, we've all had that consequence thing in school. You have, like, for us it was like a C1, C2, C3, kind of went up to a C6, which was getting expelled. And thankfully I never obviously got up to that point. I got isolations. That was the worst I got, but I could have got suspended because of how I was. And one of the things I did was verbally abusing me, making fun of him and that. And I didn't think before I said. I just was doing it because people were laughing, and it was probably really upsetting for that guy. And then, not thinking before I spoke, it got me in a lot of trouble. And ended up this guy, the next lesson I was in, didn't like what I said and came and started punching me. And obviously one of the things with ADHD is you can just see red, especially if someone comes in and starts punching you. So obviously I fought back, and that got us in a lot of trouble. I think we both got isolation for it, although it could have been a lot worse. Both could have got suspended. It wasn't very good, but it was, my mum sort of knew at this point, I can't keep having you get in trouble. It was kind of, I think she was a bit worried, really. But I'd say the hyperactive side, what I wouldn't think before I actually spoke or before I acted, was probably the worst. I had in my head of year picked up on the fact I was making a bad name for myself, pulled me out of class one day, and this story is literally an example of how I could find anything to distract myself from a conversation, however informal, whether it was in class or if it was a serious thing in this case. So she sat me down in her office, pulled me out of class, sat me down and said, right, why do you think you're here? And any misbehaving person in school, you'll know that when your head of year or whoever's pulled you out of class says, why do you think you're sitting down here? It's most probably because you've done something wrong. It's never going to be good, is it? And I knew it wasn't good, but I like to play a game of, I don't know, why could I be in here? No, I'm not sure, to be honest. And she would then be like, well, how do you think your consequences have been recently? It was sort of like she just tried to drag it out of me. And, at first I'd maybe be listening, but I'd find anything I could to distract myself. And I wouldn't do this purposefully. It's just how I worked. And I remember looking up at her glasses, and she had these pair of glasses on that said FC UK on them, which is French Connections UK, I think. But me, being my little head, thought, ha, that looks like fuck. Ha, fuck. Ha, and just started laughing. While my head of year was giving me a massive bollocking, and obviously she wasn't very happy, and was like, do you think this is funny? I'll get your parents involved. But I couldn't help it. It was just how I was. It was just how I acted. And it was just my thinking mechanism. It's just how it worked. But I saw it as sort of funny. I didn't know that it was, that was the reason. I just thought it was just how my head worked. So that's the sort of way I distract myself. And the annoying thing was that I hadn't been diagnosed with ADHD yet. So teachers and people just thought I was being a dickhead for the sake of being a dickhead. And this continued into the start of year 10. But at this point, my mum had kind of had enough, I think. or she not had enough, but she was concerned. She was concerned that I was going to ruin myself and the chance of doing well. But above all, she noticed, that just something wasn't right, and it wasn't just me misbehaving for the sake of it. So we booked a GP appointment, and my mum explained that, I've been getting in trouble a lot at school, but she was explaining it in like a way that I'd never really thought about, like sort of saying I was a bit, different to my other siblings, getting distracted, and that I couldn't concentrate. And this was probably when I started to feel really low about the whole thing. I think at that point I realised, like, shit, there's something wrong with me. Like, I'm different. Like, I don't know, I had all sorts of things going on in my head. And so like all the sort of process of being diagnosed with ADHD is, after you see a GP, they run a load of tests. So they'll get teachers involved, your parents, and obviously myself, or whoever, who it is who might possibly have ADHD, to do all these forms, questions, tests, all sorts. And then they get the diagnosis back, and they run the test depending on how highly or low you've been marked on different questions or certain bits and pieces. And I was in the severe scale, which I remember seeing on like the piece of paper and thinking like, oh my god, like I'm a severe level of ADHD, but I had no idea what it meant. And I felt like after getting this diagnosis that I'd be treated as if I was a problem child, and that I don't know, that I could never let anyone. I just felt I couldn't let anyone find out about this. I was like, there's no way I can tell my friends, like even my best friends, I couldn't tell, because I was like, they're gonna think I'm a fucking weirdo, a proper weirdo. I can't have that. Like I just can't deal with that. And I remember there was one day I went and it was like just after the diagnosis, like the few days after, it was so rough. And I went into my mum's room and I just burst into tears. Like, never sort of done that before. Like, about something that big. Like, obviously, when I was a kid, probably cried my eyes out on a few occasions, but I just didn't understand the diagnosis or what ADHD was. And I thought it meant I was at a serious disadvantage to everyone else. The fact a label had been put on why I was behaving like I was, or behaving like such a little shit, is how I always put it. But just, I was a bit naive and I didn't understand it. And I then also, part of the problem was, or part of the confusion, I think in my head, was they said, you're going to be put on this medication. And like, I didn't know what that meant, but I always knew that, sometimes I'd seen in like films and things like that, people take medication because they're crazy or whatever. And getting told I had to take medication made me feel like a mental patient. And obviously I know that sounds ridiculous. Like, I know loads of people as well who take medication for all kinds of reasons, and obviously it's perfectly fine to. In fact, I think a lot of the time it is really beneficial. But for me, I thought, God, I have this thing that's making me misbehave and act up, and the only way to contain it is to feed me drugs. It was like, I laugh about it now, but it was awful. Like, at the time, I felt genuinely so low. Like, I had serious bad thoughts that I'd never ever had before. Like, and it was only, I think, when I first started on these meds that I started to notice the change. And the change at first was like I'd just taken the Limitless pill, which if you don't get that reference, then fair enough. But I suddenly, like, I was in class, I was sticking my hand up all the time, I was really focused, like asking questions, getting the work done, and just knuckling down. Nerd Connor had returned. I was suddenly this little nerd again. And I think also, like, all the teachers knew that now that I had this ADHD, they were a lot more understanding. So I had this almost like a get out of jail free card to use if I ever messed up, or if there was a day I forgot my medication, or like returned to my old ways. The teachers were so much more understanding, and obviously that really helped. But then with the meds, with any meds, obviously there's always problems with things like side effects. And I'll go into that in a second, actually. But, like, I think being on the meds, it made me realise what I was really like without these pills. And I actually started to miss how I was, which, even though it was doing so much good for like everything in class, and I was getting work done and everything, it was good for that, but it was almost like I was in another person's body, or like in a different body, and I could see myself without the medication, and I missed it. I thought, that guy is great, that guy is like confident, he doesn't care what he says, he just says it, he's happy. Whereas this medication I was taking, like, it really kind of messed up my head a bit, which obviously I was already sort of coming to terms with the fact I had it and I didn't really understand it. Like, there's some of the side effects were like, say, lack of sleep, loss of appetite, feeling anxious and on edge for literally no reason. Like, it was just very, very intense at times, and I felt like it was just ruining my personality. Like, I felt plain, like a loaf of bread. Like, don't let anyone compare you to a loaf of bread, like I just did. But it hit me, like, suddenly, what if this ADHD was actually making me the person I was and giving me my personality? Like, people liked me for being me, and at the time when I thought that, I was like actually, like, maybe it's a good thing that I have it. Like, I wouldn't be who I am without this mental disorder, like, without having ADHD, because a lot of the time it gave me all my personality traits that I guess people know me for and people love me for, I guess. But it made me start really hating the meds a lot. Like, I didn't want to take them, but I knew I had to, because if I didn't, I'd get in trouble in school and all these problems would come up again. So I came to like a compromise. I think I suggested to my mum, can I not take them on weekends? And she was fine with that. She said, yeah, as long as I still take them for school, that it should be fine. Just because I wanted to feel like myself again on the weekends. And obviously in the week with school, it like did make sense to take them. And I actually started to really enjoy school because the teachers were giving me so much respect now, which, like, before, like, they just saw me as this, like, problem kid who just disrupted class and was a bit of a menace. And now they're really understanding, and I felt like I had way more support than most people without seeming like a special case. So it really worked in my favour, and I felt like I had the support of everyone then to be able to do as well as I could. But yeah, I think the meds are different for everyone who has ADHD. Like, not just the side effects, but the actual medication itself. Like, I know mine was, like, a lot of people probably know the one called Ritalin. I didn't take that. I took one called it's called methylphenidate, which is I don't know what it means or whatever, but it was like, it basically acts as like a stimulant which controls your brain and your body, and obviously it's going to react to it, and it does cause complications. And they obviously gave me like a leaflet and stuff before so I could read through the side effects and things. And I remember just thinking, I don't know, I didn't want to take it. The side effects thing, I think, scared me a bit, because there was ones on there, even though it was like a 1 in 10,000 people, it was like they get like a heart attack from it or something. And I thought, geez, I don't want a heart attack at 14 years old or 15, however old I was. Like, outrageous. But above all, the thing that always took me aback from like everything with getting diagnosed was when I eventually told people and that I had ADHD. Like, they were all so understanding, and I think they finally in a way were like, yeah, like, that does make sense, like, that makes sense for a lot of occasions, but they were saying, with like a smile on their face and like a, fair play, fair enough. And like, all the distractions and everything, like, to me, it made sense. Once I got my head around the fact that it made me, I think I was happy with it. I remember one person told me, if you didn't have ADHD, you wouldn't be the person you are. It makes you you. And I remember thinking then, like, yeah, like, I think you're right. Like, I have it. I can't, like, it's not like I can just get rid of it. And maybe it makes me the bubbly person that I believed I am, that I still am, I guess. I don't know. I started to see the benefits of it. I wasn't afraid to say I have ADHD anymore, in a way. I don't, like, just shout about it. Well, I guess I'm making a podcast about it, but I don't shout about it to people. But I started to see the benefits it had on my personality, just because when I took those meds, like, I realised how great it felt to be free, and not have a care in the world, like, when I wasn't taking them, because I felt so almost, I don't know, I felt so dulled out when I did take the medication. So it was just like I don't know, I felt so free and just energetic and everything when I hadn't taken them. But I felt like me. And as I've got older, I've learnt to control everything better. My concentration levels are much higher, and I'm just, in general, probably a more calm person than I used to be. But I actually stopped taking the meds as well properly before going to university, except for when I had maybe big written assignments. But even then, I hated the effect it had on me mentally. I hated taking it. I think when I was doing my dissertation, so just over a year ago, I took some then for about a week, and it was like one of the worst decisions I ever made. I think it just made me more anxious, and like the side effects were stronger than they ever have been. I remember it was terrible, and I took the decision not to then take them after that for like the last week, even though maybe I wasn't as concentrated. I just felt so much better. I felt, less stressed and everything, because I don't like stressing about things like work and things. So yeah, it's just, the side effects were terrible, and it wasn't a nice thing to have. But at the end of it, I did see the good light, the good light. But the hardest thing about having a mental disorder for me was accepting that I actually had it. Like, I wish I'd talked about it more at the time. I think it would have definitely helped, but obviously I got there in the end, and just goes to show you, people are more understanding than you think. I think when you overthink something, or you're naive about something, you don't maybe know enough about it, then it can reflect on how your mind thinks it's going to play out. But it's always good to talk about it and get a bit of sense into it. So I wish I'd done that more. But yeah, I've got to where I am, so I'm still alive. I haven't got into any serious trouble. So that is my ADHD story. I hope you've learnt something from this about ADHD that you might not have known before. I was so lucky to have such a supportive group of friends, family, and even teachers, I guess, who gave me a second chance. So yeah, if you enjoyed this story, or maybe it inspired you, you never know, then make sure to share about it. Go and like it. Go and follow the Facebook and Instagram pages, which is Wearing Hats Saying Things. I'll be back next week for another Hats Indoors. But in the meantime, check out our other videos, subscribe to our channel. Hats off to you all. Have a good one. See you later.